been almost more than 30 years since the attack on women in a Canadian university, which forms the I guess the sort of the moment for the 16-day movement and the campaign that's been going to sort of mark that attack, where a gunman literally targeted students based on their gender for women who had done nothing more than demand an education in Canada, a country we often think of as being one of the leaders when it comes to gender equality. It just reminds us this 16-day campaign, every time it comes along every year, that we just still have so far to go on this issue. It's such a challenging one. Gender-based violence is endemic. It's an issue which affects all countries everywhere. And of course, one group of women that it affects quite tragically, quite significantly, are women who demand power, demand their seat at their table, demand to be counted and represented as leaders, as politicians, as change makers. We've all seen these horrific attacks, most recently on Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, or at least the threat of violence against her. We've seen Jo Cox in the UK, the tragic situation with her a few years ago. Even young people like Malala Yousafzai, but way back in 2011, when she was targeted for doing nothing more than campaigning for girls' education. So we've got a long way to go. We've got a lot of issues to crack through. And I'd love to give our panelists the opportunity really just to sort of set the scene a little bit in their own countries. And I'd love to start with you, Sok. I've been very privileged over the years to work with some Filipino young people on political empowerment. So I know how ambitious and how motivated young people are to get into politics, particularly young women and girls. But I also know that there are a lot of challenges and barriers there when they do put themselves forward into this situation. So I'd love it if you can sort of give us a bit of a rundown of how the situation is in the Philippines. What barriers do women face when engaging in politics, and what sort of successes have you seen over the years in trying to promote gender equality in politics? So over to you.
Thank you so much, Adam. And thanks for organizing the webinar on violence and women in politics, a most relevant opener for the 16 Days of Activism to end VOW. Indeed, the risks and threats faced by women political leaders have increased in pandemic proportions in this age of digital technology, as we see social media platforms being used and abused to vilify, slut-shame women, slut-shame honorable, competent, dignified women like Senator Laila de Lima. I do not remember any woman political leader in recent history who has suffered as much violence as on her person, honor, and dignity as Senator de Lima, after she dared expose the human rights abuses of the country's highest political leader and spoke truth to power. I could never have imagined how this petite, shy, but smart history political science major at De La Salle University, whom I taught several decades ago, would pose so much threat to the macho, tough-talking, motorcycle-riding president, so much so that he vowed from day one of his presidency to destroy her. Senator Laila de Lima crossed paths with Mr. Duterte when, as chair of the Human Rights Commission, she led the probe on extrajudicial killings in Davao City, where he was mayor. When she was elected to the Philippine Senate on May 2016 and subsequently appointed chair of the Senate Committee on Justice, she continued her investigation into extrajudicial killings and presented to the committee a witness of the Davao killings, further courting the ire of Duterte. The politics of retaliation quickly reared its ugly head, using the entire government machinery led by the Department of Justice and reinforced by a subservient House Committee on Justice to extract revenge, using her alleged involvement in the drug trade to fund her senatorial campaign as the centerpiece of their attacks. In the House Committee hearings, she was pilloried with misogynistic remarks, publicly shamed and discredited. Hardened criminals whom Senator de Lima stripped off of privileges in the new beloved prison, our national penitentiary, were paraded and compelled to testify. Even a hoax video of Senator de Lima made its rounds. 3 cases of alleged conspiracy to commit drug trading were filed against her, all of which are non-bailable offenses. She has been detained since February 24, 2017, or 1,371 days as of today, November 25, 2020, the start of the worldwide celebration of 16 days of activism against Mao. Her trial has yielded no evidence of any money trail, transaction, and derogatory intelligence or information that would implicate her to the drug trade or any supposed criminal conspiracy. I have personally attended these court hearings prior to the lockdown and listened to the testimonies, the most revealing of which is that of the former head of intelligence of the Philippine National Police, Governor General Benji Magalon, who's now the mayor of Baguio City, who testified that nothing in his investigations implicated Senator De Lima. I approached him after the hearing to thank him for his courage, and he replied, "Don't worry, ma'am, the truth will come out." But even as she's detained, Senator De Lima has kept working, and the lack of access to electronic gadgets like computers, iPad, cell phone, and others has not prevented her from authoring or co-authoring 104 bills and 109 resolutions, respectively, as of November 23, 2020. Most notable is the bill promoting and protecting the rights of human rights defenders and the anti-extrajudicial killings bill. The conditions of Senator De Lima's detention are now more restrictive because of the pandemic. Visits by her staff are allowed only on specific days of the week instead of the usual daily visits from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Her lawyers also have to schedule visits. Before the pandemic, her lawyers can visit her any time of the day and night as authorized by law. All other visitors, except for family members, doctors, and spiritual advisors, are not allowed at all. There is an absolute ban on visitors who are not her office staff, lawyers, relatives, and spiritual advisors. But Senator De Lima is tough, unfazed, indomitable, in her own words. And I quote, "I'm much tougher than I thought, and my capacity for endurance is almost boundless, that I can in fact face any adversity. My self-discipline and high tolerance to discomforts have never been so manifest. There's also the realization that my weaknesses are as much valuable as my strengths. I'm strong because I'm weak. I'm not ashamed of my weaknesses and failures because this, like my strengths and successes, define my humanity." And just to add, just very recently, this president now turned against our own vice president because she was very active as a frontliner in the two typhoons that recently ravaged the country. And so this president asks, "Oh, where can this vice president been sleeping these nights?" Implying that maybe she has a lover and there's where she spends the night, and threatened her, saying, "When you run for presidency in 2022, I'll do everything to wipe you out." That's, of course, a paraphrase. So that's how bad it is. Although, of course, Adam, more than 20% of our members of the House of Representatives are women, and do also have about, I think, also about 25% in the Senate. But having said all that, it's not only about numbers. It's about women who are for gender equality and women's rights. We have to go beyond numbers because we have seen how women actually have not also taken up the cause of women. That's it. Yep. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's such a great point to end on. So much of the time we assume, just because we've ticked a few boxes, suddenly we've achieved perfect equality and things. So it's really good to so early on in the conversation point out that it's not just about the numbers and that we have to do better than that, which is a good opportunity for me just to mention though some of the numbers. You talked about the percentage of the parliamentarians in the Philippines. according to an Interparliamentary Union study on violence against women in parliaments, 81.8% of women have reported experiencing psychological violence. In the same report, 21.2% of women reported experiencing actual physical violence in the parliament. I mean, just to kind of paint a picture worldwide of how this issue affects women in politics. And of course, what is one of the results of that? So few women indeed are in politics, and those that are there often don't stick around because of the threats to their lives, and the harassment, threats, bullying, abuse, and so on. And actually, in that report as well, it was noted that only that 38.7% of female MPs said violence undermined both their mandate implementation and freedom of expression. I think these are the sorts of issues, and I know, Samira, you've been working on a lot in the context of the European Parliament, but also as someone from the Netherlands, I'm sure you've got lots to say about the Dutch perspective on this issue. So I'd love to throw it over to you and just hear some of the challenges you've been facing and some of the solutions that you've been working to promote in tackling gender-based violence in politics.
Yes, thank you very much. And it's very good that we speak about the topic, because I think that we're speaking about a topic that is, well, violence against women in general, but when we speak about specifically violence against women in politics, that's basically one of the main causes, I believe, that we still don't see a more and more participation of women in politics. What I hear in my direct environment often is that, I have the ambition to be in politics. I have the ambition to run for office, but I don't think it's always a safe environment for me to be in. I mean, that's what a lot of young women actually tell me and ask me, like, how do you cope with it? Because it's very visible that women in politics, or women who hold office, are dealing with challenges because of the fact that they are a woman. And this is something that I very much experienced myself from the day that I became public as a candidate for the European elections. I right away experienced that because of the fact that I'm a woman, I'm dealing with discrimination and exclusion. And this is something that we really need to fight, because otherwise we also see that there will be less women actually looking and creating the solutions in politics that is good for women and girls in society. I mean, we need women in decision-making processes. We need more women in politics so that they can decide for their own future. So it's very bad that we see that violence and harassment is actually jeopardizing this. And I think from the European Parliament perspective, it's very much needed that we create the awareness, that we acknowledge it, that we discuss it a lot in the European Parliament. So that's what we're trying to do from the Committee for Women's Rights and Gender Equality. It's also very important that we keep supporting, movements like Me Too. We recently had an own hearing ourselves within our own institution about Me Too cases, sexual harassment, and this is something that we need to create a platform for, so that there's a safe space in which victims of sexual harassment, for example, can do their testimonial and are protected also in this. And I think that what really is going to work is that we find a legal framework, that we create a legal framework where sexist hate speech, especially online, is a criminal offense. We need to work towards legislation to protect specifically women in politics against this, because it's something that nowadays in the online world is very hard to tackle. So that's basically an example of what we think we need to work on coming from the European Parliament. And the main important thing to work on this, so a legal framework, and a campaign that's raising awareness, working on safe safe environments within our own institutions, making sure that women can participate in the way they want in politics, is at the end, this is about our future. If they're not in these kind of decision-making processes, then that also means something for the solutions, the policies, and the legislations that they can create for their own future and for many women and girls in society. It is true that as a woman in politics, you're dealing with significantly more discrimination and exclusion. And I think it's also important to raise that there's also this intersectional dimension here. I mean, I can also speak for myself that as being a young woman of color, that adds also to the kind of and the level of discrimination that you're experiencing. So we also need to be very sensitive for the fact that that women do not look alike, they're different, and given their background and where they're coming from, we also need to make sure that we have an approach that is sensitive for these kind of characters. So that's my takeaway for now.
Thanks so much, Samira. I'm so glad you mentioned intersectionality. I would love to come back to that later in the conversation. So let's put a pin on that, as they say. Madelaine, I wanted to turn to you. We also here in the ALDE Party recently conducted a survey, which we're hoping to share some of the results early next year. And in the survey, 50% of women, liberal women across the ALDE Party membership, reported that online harassment would make them less likely to remain in politics. So sort of going back to my point about what are some of the consequences of gender-based violence against women in politics. Now, the European Women's Academy was set up in many ways to help women overcome these sorts of barriers and to support women who do want to sort of step into the political arena. And you have been a member of the alumni. You were a member of a class, and now you're an active member of the European Women's Academy alumni. So I'd love to hear not only about your perspective as a mayor in Sweden and some of the issues, challenges you face in that role, but also in what sort of ways has the EWA supported you over the years, and what could be done more in that regard to support women. So over to you, Madelaine.
Okay, thank you, Adam. This is a really big question, and I really appreciate that we talk about this, because otherwise we won't see any changes. And I would say that we have taken a lot of steps towards gender equality in Sweden, but we aren't there yet. And we see a lot of women in politics, but we also need women in leading positions, not only in politics. My party has the highest number of women as mayors, but we are still not 50% of the mayors. So a long way to go from here anyway. And I think we also should start with thinking about why there should be more women in politics. I think it's easy, because we're half of the population and should have half of the power. And glass ceilings are breaking as we speak, one of the most recently broken by Kamala Harris, I would say. However, we still have a lot of ceilings to break, and we need role models, women that break those ceilings for us. But I also think that we can be those women and show all the girls around the world that it can be done. For me, gender equality isn't important just for my daughter and for women, but equally important for my sons. They should also be allowed to be who they are without being forced into typical male roles. And I would say that's a really big thing in this. We need a man in this. They have to understand why gender equality in every aspect is good for the whole society. We have to fight for this together. And research here in Sweden has shown that research that has been done on company boards, for example, connected to gender equality, shows higher profits and better results for the companies that has boards with gender equality. So it's also a question of money, and that's something most people is willing to understand. I would say that women need to support other women. We aren't always so good at that. And I think that we often see each other as competitors instead of seeing each other as colleagues. And politics is still a man's world, even though more and more women in the world are being elected. And I believe that we as women have to fight harder for our positions than men, and I often feel that we have to be twice as good as them. To be truthful, I see a lot of mediocre men on high positions, and they can make a lot of mistakes that aren't accepted if women make the same mistakes. Social media is really tough, and women is being attacked a lot. I would say here in Sweden that it's worst on the national level. When I see my party leader's social media, I don't really understand how she manages to move on sometimes, because I know that she reads it. We need stricter laws and also people working with these questions and finding the people sitting behind these screens writing these awful things, because I think it's a problem with that it's easy to sit behind a screen writing awful things than saying it in the face of another person. I would say that the times that I have been attacked, it's mostly on social media. And then I know some of these people, and when I meet them, they don't say these awful things to me, but they can write it on social media. So it's a big problem. And so to the question, how then can get more women elected? I would say that training and networks are the thing, and that's where EVA, European Women Academy, comes in. I graduated from EVA in 2017, and I would say that it was the best training ever, and it really gave me the confidence to go back home and win another election, something that hasn't been done for like 30 years in my municipality. And I would also say that one of the most important things for me about EVA is the network. It's really important for me, and here we weren't competitors, and we will never be. We can support each other completely and talk about things that you can't talk to anyone in your own party about. Because in your own party, you may or may not be competitors, but in some ways you are. But since we were from so many different countries, we could support each other in a completely different way. And it was also so interesting to get an insight from all these different countries, how the politics works in all these different parties. So that kind of education that EVA offers is necessary to get gender equality, I would say. I also would say that I have a lot of fantastic role models in my party. We now have our third woman as party leader, and we had the first woman as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, etc. But we can't be satisfied with that. We still haven't got gender equality, and we still haven't had a woman as a Prime Minister in Sweden. And now I would say that there also are a lot of people in Sweden that want us to go backwards in this. We even have parties that doesn't want more women with power, because that's what it's all about. Women need power, and we have to fight together, women and men, to succeed in this. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Madelaine. It's great to hear about some of the solutions, some of the kind of strategies for dealing with this when it can seem so overwhelming. I think with gender-based violence, you know, it is so endemic, and it's driven by so much about society and attitudes and norms that you know it can be very difficult to know where to even begin. I wanted to just kind of, normally in these sorts of conversations about gender equality, we inevitably turn to the role of men and boys, and often that I find that comes sort of towards the end when someone just sort of points that out. But I actually want to dive in like straight away with you three about this kind of idea of toxic masculinity. And you know, Sok in particular, you mentioned, you know, some of the like horrific, vile things that male politicians have said about your senator and about other female politicians. And, you know, sometimes I feel like when we talk about GBV, gender-based violence, it's just totally euphemistic. What we're talking about is male violence, men's violence against women. At 99.9% at least of the violence we're talking about is perpetrated by men. And, you know, so much of that is fueled by this idea of sort of a traditional masculinity that is about reinforcing, negative stereotypes that oppress women, and violence is the way in which a lot of that is policed and reinforced. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more. I mean, you've given us quite a few examples of some of the attacks that male politicians have made against female politicians in the Philippines. I wonder, though, if you could talk about how we can actually start to challenge this idea about toxic masculinity in the Philippines. What sort of strategies have you seen, or indeed is this a near impossible task? What give us some hope. So.
Well, in the Philippines, there's lots of efforts already along that way. I mentioned, for example, that there is this organization called Every Woman that is actually organized in response to the slut shaming of Senator Laila de Lima in the congressional hearings, when she was really like slut shamed, and and by the way, the women joined in. I mean, the women legislators didn't really say a word in her defense. In fact, some were, even smiling. And so we, a group of women's rights activists, formed this group called Every Woman. And as I said, it's a coalition of different organizations that's already gaining more and more, support. And in fact, we also have initiated a Facebook-based dialogue or conversation called Usapang Every Woman, which means, usapan, meaning a conversation, a dialogue among women. And we would have different sessions, inviting different speakers, talking about different aspects of women's rights issues. And we have also Facebook-based, say, Bantay Bastos, which means stop the misogyny, or we are stop the rudeness. And it is to really encourage people who are victims of misogyny to come report what happened to them. So that's slowly. But you see, we have to understand the context here, because you have also populist authoritarianism. So you have misogyny, but at the same time, you have populist authoritarian leaders who, by the way, themselves are the ones, perpetuating this kind of behavior. And in fact, would tell, the police to shoot the women rebels in their vagina, and who will make fun of, this Australian missionary who was raped, in the Philippines, and said, "Oh, I should have been first." This is the kind of leader, this is the toxic of toxic masculinities. And so there are many, many entry points. I mean, it's not just about us women getting together, but also understanding the political context where we are working. When you have a leader who is very popular, by the way, with 91% popularity, and who people consider as, the father, as the protector. So never mind all those misogynistic remarks, he gets away with it. Oh, he was just joking, and people are used to it. Why can't you take a joke? Well, for us, rape is not a joke. And definitely not telling your police to shoot women rebels in their vagina. That's not a joke. And also saying, "Oh, where did the vice president sleep tonight?" Because our vice president is a widow, and she is actively participating and very much engaged in this relief campaign for the victims of the typhoon. So, it's not just about us, the women. It's also about, the political situation you're in. So it's a multi-layered, Adam, kind of, of situation.
Thanks so much, Sok. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, Samira, similar question for you. I'm also wondering if you know, Madelaine raised issues of role models and things too, and I'm thinking, you know, there are obviously a lot of terrible examples of male leadership out there. Philippines being one, but you know, I'm thinking closer to home here in Europe or in the States, Bolsonaro, Trump. You know, there's a lot of leaders who are you know, setting us back several decades, in my opinion, when it comes to, you know, good modeling good behavior for men. But we've also got examples like Alexander De Croo. We've got Justin Trudeau, you know, men who are proud feminists, not afraid to boost women in politics and so on. So I wonder if in the European context, if there are some examples you've seen of you know, good role models and what sort of impact that can have on this issue.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it's definitely very important that we work with role models and that we also find coalitions with male role models, because otherwise you get this effect of constantly having the usual suspects to speak about it. And I think that also men need to understand that gender equality and the protection of women's rights is also good for their own future. I mean, it's also about them. It's about a whole society. And it's very strong what I see in my environment if male leaders and influential male leaders make statements about it, but also show that they work very hard on, for example, legislation and policies that protect women and girls from discrimination and violence. And I think you've mentioned some good examples of male leaders in the world that can be a good example of that. But I also think that we do not only need to find it in the higher level political leaders level, but also in all kinds of organizations and situations where we see men raising their voice and standing up for women's rights. When it comes to role models, it's very important. I agree indeed that we do not only need it in politics, because it's also here about building very strategic coalitions with other women, with role models, with influential people in different kind of sectors that can work globally and collectively on more gender equality in all layers of society. So that's, for example, why some groups in the European Parliament find it very important that the directive Women on Boards is being unblocked. That's a directive coming from the EU saying that we basically need more women in board companies of listed companies here in Europe. So we also need to think about all these kind of very strategic solutions, like having more women in board positions, in top positions, in very significant and very influential positions, so that they show that they can be a role model, but that they can also be part of decision-making processes through which very impactful solutions and policies are being implemented. That also affects women and girls in society. These are also the kind of things that we need to do, and that we come out from the European Parliament, trying to unblock files and directives that are now stuck in the Council, but that definitely help for the visibility of women and the impact of women in higher positions. But let's also not underestimate that we're still dealing with also here member states in the European Union that, for example, are threatening to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention, you know, and that's very worrisome. So we also see that here in Europe, there are controversial and very conservative movements that are basically causing a backlash when it comes to the protection of women's rights. And that is something that we not expect. So I just hope that like women on boards, but also ratifying the Istanbul Convention by all by all possible member states and countries involved in that.
Thanks, Samira. It's a great point about the Istanbul Convention, and absolutely something that we're focusing on here in the ALDE Party with the 16 Days of Activism, making sure that countries ratify and sign on to the convention. But I just wanted to make sure we're all okay with the connection. I think, Samira, just towards the end there, we lost you for a second, but everyone else is fine. You can all hear me okay? Good. And I also just wanted to take a moment to thank people for those attendees on the call for sending in some questions and things, and just to encourage you with the 20 minutes that we've got left together, just to really flick through some questions if you have them. I look forward to receiving them and to putting them to our panelists. I see Karina has shared experience as a Minister of Education in Moldova, so thank you, Karina, for that. Noting that, as a minister, well, until she became a minister, she hadn't really experienced so much sexism, discrimination, and then suddenly, rather than her being critiqued for her work, it was more about her dress style and things like that, which I think sounds all too familiar. But also, I'm thinking as a Minister of Education, Karina, there's another question here from Stefan, who's sort of leaning into education as a potential key strategy for tackling gender-based violence broadly, and I guess in politics. And Madelaine, yeah, I was going to put this to you actually. We talk a lot about the way in which children are socialized, conditioned, educated, to fulfill certain roles that we expect of them based on their gender. So I wonder if this is something you could share some thoughts on, and from your perspective in Sweden, how important is education in tackling gender-based violence?
It's really important, but I would say that we have to start in kindergarten, because when they are in school, they are already formed into different roles. You see that quite early, that they are formed into roles. If I just look at my own kids, you see that they are formed early. So you have to really focus on kindergarten, I think. And then we also need a more diverse staff in kindergarten, because it's almost only women, at least here in Sweden, and I guess it's the same in a lot of countries, because I think that we need men as role models here, to show the boys and the girls that men and women do the same things, because that's a really important thing as well, I think, because being a politician, you work a lot, and it takes a lot of time. And if you have kids, I've had small kids all through my political career. You need, if you're married, then you need a husband that's also taking a lot of responsibility at home. So you need kids to see men taking a lot of responsibility in the home, sharing the chores and so on, I think. But you have to start with kindergarten. But of course, it's a really important question throughout all the education systems, I would say, talking about gender equality, but also giving the teachers ways of seeing what they are doing, because you treat girls and boys differently. The research has shown that a lot, but you do it without even thinking about it. So it's really important to talk about that, what you let the boys do and what you let the girls do, and so on, to also get the girls to take more place and speak more and all those things that are needed. But I think you have to start in kindergarten, but it's really important what you do in school. But small kids are easier to get into this. If you start to talk about this when they are teenagers, they have already formed their own mind about things. Then a big problem here, I would say, is the parents, because you can't really change them. I've experienced that ethical problems and stuff in school. And when you ask the kids, but why do you think that? My dad has told me. So it's really important to work with the kids, but also with the attitude in the whole society. But school is.
Adam?
Did you want to add something, Sok? Go for it. Yeah.
No, I want to respond to that about education.
Go for it. Yeah.
Again, we have to look at the new context because of the pandemic. A lot of schooling is now online. And there is now the combination of like online and modular. And here in the Philippines, we have, discovered that the modules, that are being dished out to the students, there's still the very, strong gender bias that, they're asked, or they're told in the modules that's distributed, what do girls do and what do boys do? And it's still that, that sexist. Oh, the girls, they have to cook, they have to wash dishes, they have to go out and clean perhaps the car. So that's very important. Education is key, but we have to look out for what kind of modules they are being that are being used. Second, with this online schooling, it's the mom, who is really in the front lines. But this mom is at the same time, working from home. So this is now the care economy kicking in, because she has to, work, she has to teach the children. And if, there is no gender division of labor in the household, so she actually is the most overworked in the pandemic situation. So we also have to look at how, the current context, the current situation affects education as key to, to teaching gender sensitivity and awareness.
Yeah, such great points. And I see in the comments here, Olga has noted about the lack of men in schools and kindergartens as teachers, I assume, and the fact that a lot of this comes down to pay, and when those salaries are low, it's seen more as women's work, and men flee those sectors, and that's obviously a big issue. To which I sort of say, well, who's making the decisions around salaries and things, right? Often if your leadership is overwhelmingly male, they're not going to necessarily see the value in certain types of work. So having more women in positions of power can obviously go a long way to rectifying the gendered roles in education and other sectors as well. So I think it's all connected and all really important. And thanks, Soc, for sharing those thoughts about the Philippines. Samira, I wanted to come to you. I've two questions. One, actually, the first, when you were talking before about efforts to try and stamp out hate speech, which I think is incredibly important, and we've all seen examples of this, extreme verbal violence. And we've seen the statistics on how many women in power actually experience this on a daily basis. But of course, there's a balance there around freedom of expression, and often freedom of expression, or Soc mentioned humor. These are sort of screens that men will hide behind to say, look, you're shutting me down, you can't take a joke, and so on. And yet, of course, we all know that this hate speech is a way of actually shutting down women's free speech and so on. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that balance and how do we get that right, going forward.
Yeah, I think what's starting to become tricky here, especially when we speak about online hate speech, is that in a way we normalize it. Like I realized it when that was last year, and I was actually telling an acquaintance of mine that I received a post on my Twitter line. And that was, of course, someone anonymous. It was obviously not its real name, but it was a picture with a bomb on it. And it said to me, please look out. So, and with a picture of a bomb, basically expressing that something will explode in my own environment. So I was telling that to my acquaintance, and then that person said to me, so what did you do? I said, well, that's Twitter, that's social media. But I realized because of her response that this is not normal. Someone is threatening you. Like, why suddenly, if it's online, we normalize it, and we just go on and we think, well, that's another crazy idiot person that is threatening me or that is harassing me. I mean, if that person would have done it offline, threatening you with a bomb, that would be a very different situation, right? So there's also something going on in terms of we think it's normal online, because at the end you cannot do a lot about it. It's all anonymously. It's you know, it's not transparent, but these are actually real people behind computers that are doing that on purpose. So we really need to be aware that this is not normal, and therefore we really need to work on very, very serious, significant legal frameworks that also exists of methods and instruments to do the research on the internet, because that also means that there need to be methods to find out who these persons are, and that will cost also a lot of resources, but these resources are needed to show people that even when you do it online, you cannot get away with it. And you know, there's, I think, how do you find the right balance? Well, that's definitely through strong legal instruments, but I also think that we need to speak out more about this is not normal behavior. So also confronting online, doing these awareness campaigns online is very important to show that even though it's online hate speech, we don't accept it, and you cannot get away with it. That's I think one of the main important things that need to happen. But I must admit that it's very, very difficult at the moment, of course, to counter it. Yes, it's not easy.
Yeah, thanks. No, it's definitely a difficult one to challenge, to think about. So it's great to hear there's at least some thinking going on in your work. You also raised before the issue of intersectionality. I promised to come back to that because I think this is also really important. So I wanted to put this to all the panelists. I'll start with you, Samira, since we're already with you. One of the consequences of gender-based violence, of course, is that it diminishes diversity in politics. You know, it means we have a less representative leadership, and we have less diversity of policymakers and so on. And of course, gender-based violence impacts women of color, younger women with different intersecting, you know, identities much more dramatically than it does for others. So I wonder, you know, what other steps can we do to raise awareness around the importance of diversity, the issue of intersectionality more broadly? Sometimes I feel like for people it's a very tricky one to kind of get their head around it. How do we actually sort of address this?
Yes, it's a very important one. You know, first of all, we have this bias because there's a lack of diversity in our own institutions ourselves. So if you don't have that visibility in your own institutions or in political parties, then it's already very hard to be very sensitive for it. So first of all, again, we also need to start with female role models that have different backgrounds. I mean, that's, for example, why I got very emotional when Kamala Harris was elected, because, you know, it's really the power of recognition. Saying to you that yes, you can do that too, and you can also be the norm. So role models are very important. The political parties have a major responsibility to making sure that they present diverse candidate lists. And then within the European Parliament, in my own committee, I'm constantly, like, every report we do, everything we discuss, we're making sure that there's this intersecting approach, and that we also mainstream the reports and all the proposals based on that, making sure that these different challenges of women are taken into account. And I'm glad to see that also the European Commission now is very much aware of intersectionality and the importance of that. And one thing that can make it even more clearer, and also in terms of, you know, making solutions and instruments that can target specific groups of women is data collection. We need to have more data on the topic. I'm glad to see that for example, the IG Institute is definitely having more attention for that. But for the recent years, we really need to gather more data on what different women with different backgrounds in our society are experiencing, so that we are making sure that our policies and legislation are also working for them. But role models is very important to make sure that the visibility is there, giving the message to other women, yes, you can be it too, but also making sure that different questions are being raised during negotiations and during decision-making process, because that's the power of diversity.
Yeah, and role models help to normalize things in the more positive direction, right? I mean, it's you know, when these things cease to become interesting, you know, a female vice president, you know, then we'll know we're on the right track. Madelaine, same question for you. You know, have you in Sweden, do you see efforts to sort of tackle diversity even within female representation, participation in politics? And yeah.
It's difficult, I would say, because when we set together candidates list, we look in our own areas where we are actually living or whatever. And if you aren't really connected to different diversities, then you won't find these candidates. So you have to find candidates in new ways, I think. You have to look in places where you haven't looked before, because otherwise there will still be a lot of men and a lot of elderly men, and not so many young people, and not people from other backgrounds and so on. So as I said in the beginning, and as Samira just said, role models are the key. I think we have to get the first in every aspect, because then we have role models so that people can see that it's possible, and that then everyone has someone to look up to. And as I said in the beginning, we still haven't had a woman as a prime minister in Sweden. Mm-hmm. And I'm really looking forward for that, because we really need it. Mm-hmm. We need a prime minister that's a woman, because then she will be a role model. And of course, I'm hoping that it will be my party leader, but definitely a woman as a prime minister in Sweden.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we look forward to that as well. So over to you. Yeah, I was curious about.
Yes. In my part of the world. Yeah.
Beautiful part of the world.
Role models are indeed very important. In the Philippines, we had women presidents. We had Cory Aquino, and we had Gloria Macapagal. These are women presidents. However, when do they become really role models? For example, they become, for me, they become role models, not only because they're women, but because they fight for the women's agenda. Like, for example, reproductive health rights. No? We had a woman president who actually didn't, have that in her agenda. In fact, it was not during her time that the reproductive health and rights bill was passed. Then we have another woman president. I will not mention names anymore because, another woman president. Was she a role model? Yeah, for corruption, yeah. Because her administration was really, rigged with corruption. So it's not just being a woman, but being that woman who will embody, the ideals of what it is to really fight for women's rights, for gender equality. Now, intersectionality, important, extremely important. However, intersectionality in in political representation will not happen in countries where those who get elected to office are women from political families, from elitist families. So intersectionality there is lost, because these are the same kind of women who are, the rich, who are the educated, who are coming from, that class, only one socioeconomic class. But important, role models, intersectionality, important. But again, it's not enough that you have women, but women who are for women's empowerment and women's rights. And that in political recruitment, in recruitment for candidates in political parties, also important that there is a certain, level of socio-economic, equality. Otherwise, it doesn't happen.
Thanks so much, Sok. And it's great. You've brought us all the way back to one of the very first points I think you made, which was we have to go beyond just the numbers and actually think much more about, how this, that these issues are very personal and that we all have a role to play in helping to combat gender-based violence and gender inequality more broadly. I see we're right on time, so I want to take the opportunity to thank our panelists. I just found that a really fascinating and really constructive conversation. Again, not an easy issue. Sometimes feels a bit overwhelming, if I'm honest, but I feel like we got a lot of light during that conversation. I'm going to pass it back over to Natalie and just thank all of our participants for joining us this morning. I hope you found it a great conversation as well. So over to you, Natalie.
Thank you so much, Adam. And thank you to everyone who joined us this morning. As Adam mentioned, this is obviously not an easy topic by any means, and it's a very complex topic with many different moving parts. But the most important thing, the first step we can take is to start a meaningful dialogue. And I think that is obviously the purpose of this event this morning. And hopefully more meaningful dialogue will be created, not only throughout these 16 days of activism, but past that and for years to come. So obviously, I just want to spotlight quickly to everyone this wonderful graphic image that Esther has created for us throughout this event. You can see just from the amount of things that are on this illustration, how important this topic is, how complex, and just thank you, Esther, so much for this wonderful illustration of this event. We'll be sending this around to everyone, to our panelists, to our attendees. And we just want to thank everyone again for joining us this morning. Thank you to our panelists for taking the time out of your day to talk about this very important issue on this very important day. And we hopefully look forward to welcoming you to another ALDE Party and FNF panel soon. And yes, thank you everyone on Zoom for attending. Thank you everyone on Facebook for attending. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you to Esther. And yes, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day and wonderful rest of the week, and that everyone is staying safe and healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Ours is good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Nice meeting all of you. Bye-bye.
Well.
Same to you.